Hi, welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. I am me, Patsy with a Z. I am the creator and host of Joy on Paper Live and Joy on Paper, the radio program. Just last week, I celebrated the 9th anniversary of Joy on Paper on the radio. After all that time and over 2,000 interviews, I decided it was time to start a YouTube station so that I could reach out to more readers and to help authors promote their books. So today I'm going to have an interview with two wonderful authors, and I think you're going to really enjoy them because they are fantastic. And it just happened that both of them are named Steve. And I was so surprised. I didn't realize it, as I was busy getting ready for this program, I was thinking, oh, you know, I never even thought about having two authors of the same name, but what the heck? Two Steves are better than no Steves. And Steve is a wonderful name. It's a British origin. And of course, it means victorious. And so I feel that any author who gets published, well, until you are get published, really you're just a writer. But once you get published, you're a real author. And these two are really authors. And I am so happy to. First, I'm going to talk to Steve Berry. He is a global best-selling author. He is a New York Times best-selling author, of course, and he's sold around 30 million books. That's not bad. But the story behind how he started, now that's interesting. How many times do you think Steve was rejected? Let's say it's more than one digit. And what does that prove? It proves that, well, he's persistent. He didn't give up. And that's what makes a great author. So I hope that you will enjoy this interview with Steve. And then once we finish that, I'm going to have the other Steve, which is lots of fun. So, Steve Berry, new book is called The Atlas Maneuver. It's a great book. And of course, it's available online. But we'll let Steve tell you about it because I caught him while he was working on the last chapter of his latest book. And so, right, I interrupted him right in the middle of his workday, but he was so kind and gave me a lot of time to talk because he knows too that, well, he's an inspiration. My goodness, anybody who sells 30 million. And let's just say he was rejected a few times. How many? What do you think? Make a guess. And now you can listen to Steve Berry, and he's going to tell you how many times he was rejected. And, well, that's life. But boy, oh boy, it's wonderful when somebody really, really makes a great success. And this is Steve Berry. Hi, welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. And boy, oh boy, do we have a story behind today's book. And I am so happy to welcome to Joy on Paper Steve Berry because he has a wonderful new book out. And I am so happy I don't see him. There you are. There's the book, Steve. But I'm going to see you in a minute. So here I actually have the book, and I have the first little scene from your book. We have a picture of the Philippines and a map of the Philippines, and that plays an important part in the opening of your book.
It certainly does. The prologue of the novel takes place in the Philippines in 1945, right towards the end of the war, when General Yamashita was hiding 175 underground vaults around the Philippines, full of gold and silver and other valuables that the Japanese had plundered from across Southeast Asia. So that's the beginning of the novel called Yamashita's Gold, and then that gold goes on to figure into the entire plot of the book, and particularly dealing with Bitcoin, which comes into play into the book, about halfway in.
The wonderful thing about this book, for many reasons, is this analysis that you have done of Bitcoin. And I know that you did a lot of work and research on it. And I think you are the first one I have read where I actually came out at the end saying, yeah, I think I understand it a little bit.
No, that was one of the purposes. I wanted, of course, when you write a novel, you want to entertain. That's the number one thing you want to do. But I did want to inform a little bit on Bitcoin. It's a subject that I knew nothing about. I didn't know the first thing about Bitcoin when I got the idea for this novel. I spent about 6 months reading a number of books, and then I talked to some folks who deal in Bitcoin every day. These are professionals who deal in it from a brokerage standpoint. I learned a lot from all of them, and I wanted to reduce that down to where the reader could get an understanding. This may be the very first novel that I'm aware of, because I looked and couldn't find anything else. The very first novel in which Bitcoin is the plot of the novel. It's just not in the novel, it is the entire plot of the novel. So it's all there. And like you said, I hope you do get a little bit of an understanding of it.
You break it down into, well, into bits. So you tell us from the beginning. Start about the 21 million. Why 21 million?
Well, that's the whole point. Bitcoin is finite. When the program was created in 2009, it was created to have 21 million coins, and that's all. And then when you mine the coins by solving the mathematical equations, you solve the equations. The first one who solves the equations wins a coin. But it's just not any coin. In the beginning, you got thousands of coins when you solve the equations, and then there's something called the halvings. And periodically, at every 200,000 bitcoins, there's a halving. Right now, there's a halving coming up in very soon. Very soon, somewhere at time in April, it will half again. I think if you solve the equations after that, a coin's going to be you're going to get about 1.6 bitcoins. We're down to the end now. 19 million bitcoins have been issued. There's 2 million more to go, and that'll progress down and down and down as the halvings go. Because as you see, you can half this for infinity. You just keep halving and halving and halving and halving. It could go on forever. You never really get to zero, but you get really close to zero. So effectively, over the next, I don't know, certainly within the next 4 years, the vast majority of the bitcoins will be mined, and that's what gives them value. Is there's only a number of them. Unlike other cryptocurrency, which is not limited, it's unlimited. Its value is very, very liquid and very unstable. Bitcoin stays more stable, and right now, Bitcoin's up. It's very, very high right now. It's about $70,000 for a Bitcoin.
And it's funny, the word they use the word mind. So people think that I talk to people, and I mean, I knew even for myself, the first time I heard it, I was thinking they're digging for it. What exactly are they doing?
Well, it's very similar to when there was a gold rush and you went out and you dug in the ground. You didn't know if you were going to find gold or not. You just kept digging until you could find it. Or you went to a stream and you panned the gold. You had no idea whether you were going to find it. You just kept panning until you came across it. Well, in this case, there's a computer program that was created by Satoshi Nakamoto. No one knows who that individual is, or whether it is an individual. It could be more than one person, could be an organization. No one knows. But Satoshi Nakamoto created blockchain. Blockchain is what made everything revolutionary. Blockchain is why you can charge on your credit card online, or why you can pay a bill online. It's because of blockchain. Blockchain eliminated the problem of paying twice. You don't pay a bill twice. You pay it once. Blockchain locks that in. It's unhackable. It cannot be penetrated because of the nature of it. There's millions and millions of blocks, and they're all linked to one another. To hack it, you have to hack every one of those blocks, which is impossible to do. Blockchain is what led to Bitcoin. And what happens is there's a mathematical equations that come up, and you have to solve those. Now, the faster you solve them, the faster you get the solution, and then you solve another one, you get another solution, you solve another, you get another solution, and you end up with these numbers. And when you get all those numbers in sequence, you win. Now, how do you do that fast? You have to have fast computers, very fast. In the beginning, there was not many people mining, so you could take your time. But today, there's millions of people going on and solving the equation, which comes from the Bitcoin program. So they use high speed computers. And so the high speed computers solve it. And when you do, you get a reward. So it's almost identical to going out and painting for gold. The only difference is gold has an intrinsic value to itself. You have something you can hold in your hand. It has value. Bitcoin's value is determined 100% by what someone else will pay for it. That's its only value. And right now, they're willing to pay $70,000 for a Bitcoin.
Wow. When they show it on TV, that you look at the financial channel, they will show this big facility and things are running, things are happening, and they're saying it uses up a lot of electricity because they're running these computers. It's not one computer. There are computers all over the world trying to do this.
Yes, yes. Everyone has they set up very high speed computers to solve the equations. The program is very intuitive. If you're having trouble solving it, in other words, if it doesn't get solved within a certain amount of time, it loosens it up a little bit so someone can solve it. If it's getting solved too fast, it makes it more complicated so that it's not as easy to solve. The program is somewhat intuitive in that regard, but you use high speed computers. And the thing about using the power, that's sort of, I mean, I don't really believe that's really the case. You're talking about a tiny, tiny, tiny little portion of power being used to mine Bitcoins. That's part of what's put out by those who disparage Bitcoin, who want to say don't use it. And the number one person the number one place that disparages Bitcoin is the government. The governments do not like it; they hate it. The Central Intelligence Agency hates it. The United States Treasury hates it. So there's a lot of disparagement going on with it, and that's dealt with in the novel as well. And there's a reason why they disparage it, and I deal with that in the novel.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the Philippines and to that gold that
Yeah, you
disappeared.
need, yeah, you need for the Atlas maneuver, which I created myself, by the way. But if for the Atlas maneuver to work, you need a large sum of money. You need a lot of money, and so Yamashita's gold gives the Bank of St. George in my novel the money they need to do what they need to do. The book really involves a war between the Bank of St. George, which is the oldest bank in the world, and it actually was the oldest bank in the world, and the CIA. There's a war going on between these two entities that Cotton Malone gets drawn into.
The entire premise is so fascinating because of this Bitcoin. Tell us about the pizza behind Bitcoin, this
Well, it's a
story.
pizza day.
Yeah,
Pizza
I
day
think
is what
people
it's
will
called.
find that interesting. I had no idea. We don't know if this person who invented Bitcoin is real, but we do know that at some point somebody started trading with it. So explain
Yeah,
the pizza.
we know that Satoshi Nakamoto has 1 million Bitcoin, and they're in a wallet. With Bitcoin, it's very transparent. Every single wallet is online. You can see every single wallet. You know how many Bitcoin are in the wallet. You just don't know who owns the wallet. They're anonymous there. But the wallets are transparent. It would be like you knowing where every single dollar bill is. If you knew where every dollar bill is in the world, you just don't know who's holding them, but you know where they are. That's what Bitcoin has. So Satoshi Nakamoto has 1 million sitting there that have not been touched since 2009. But what happened in 2009 was something called, the Bitcoiners called Pizza Day. It was the very first transaction ever done with Bitcoin. A gentleman in Europe, a gentleman in Jacksonville, Florida, wanted two large Papa John pizzas. And he went on to the chat rooms and he said, I will give, and I think it was about 10,000 Bitcoin at the time. Bitcoin was not worth a lot. I don't remember the exact amount, but it was a lot of Bitcoin. I will give this Bitcoin if someone will have two large Papa John pizzas delivered to my house. Someone in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, I believe, did that. Called Papa John's in Jacksonville, ordered the pizzas, had the pizzas delivered, and then the gentleman deposited the Bitcoins over to the gentleman in Amsterdam. Now, those 10,000 Bitcoins today at 70,000 a piece, you do the math, that's a lot of money. They're worth a lot of money, but at that time, Bitcoin was worth pennies. They weren't worth very much. It just started. It just begun. So that is the very first transaction. Today, there are millions of transactions done every day.
Wow. I don't think that guy who got the pizza is eating pizza anymore. I think he's like sick of hearing
Yeah.
about pizza.
Well, he's probably sick of, yeah, $70,000 times 10,000 bitcoins.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah,
lot of money.
more than most countries make in a year.
Yeah, I was just doing the math right here just to see. I
Yeah.
couldn't do it in my head right quick. That would be three. That would be three, six, $700 million today.
Okay, well, it's something to think about when you're eating a pizza, and it's a nice story to tell. So it brings you, as you said, and brings Cotton into a lot of excitement. As always with your books, we get to travel, we get to go around, we learn about the Philippines. We, of course, go to Basel, and I've been to myself. A fascinating place. I've been to Switzerland many times. But then you take us to someplace really exciting. So tell us about this. And I think most of the book is spent right here,
Right
somewhere
there.
in
There it
right
is. Yeah.
there. It
There it
is.
is. Yeah, that's the Atlas Mountains of Morocco. They are quite beautiful, as you can see, very barren in a lot of ways. There's not a lot of vegetation there. Um, and I visited there a few years ago and said this would make a great place for a novel. Richard Branson, who owns Virgin Atlantic, has a hotel there. And the hotel is there in the mountains. It's quite beautiful. And I said, let's set a book here. So about a third of the novel takes place there. The climax of the book takes place there. And the Atlas Maneuver takes its name from the Atlas Mountains where it was conceived. So this is just one of the locales like I have in my novels. All my novels have interesting locales, and this is the one for this book.
Well, it is a beautiful location. Where did you go when you were over there?
Well, I was in Marrakesh, and I left Marrakesh, and we went down in Elizabeth and I went down into the Atlas Mountains, which is about an hour south of Marrakesh, and got to experience it and visit it. I'd like to go back again one day. It was quite lovely.
As always, in all of your books, you have some really great bad characters, uh, bad guys, or in this case, gals. So tell us. I think it's so much fun how you auction the name.
I
Uh,
did, yeah,
yeah.
I did.
So tell us about that.
The antagonist of the novel is a lady named Catherine Gledhill, and she lives here in the neighborhood. She's a neighbor. And we had a charity auction here, and her husband bought the name right. And so I went to her and said, what would you like? And she said, I want to be the meanest, baddest, nastiest character I can be. So I said, okay, no problem. So that's Catherine Gledhill in the Atlas Maneuver. She's a very interesting person. She heads up the Bank of St. George, which is the oldest bank in the world. And it was the oldest bank in the world. It existed from 1450 to around 1805. Napoleon ended it in 1805. In my novel, he ended it, but it moved from Italy to Luxembourg and just kept going, and it's still there. So she's the head of the bank, and she's got a plan that she wants to put into place, a plan that's going to disrupt a lot of national economies. She's motivated by greed. She doesn't have a lot of morals, and she does a lot of bad things. And so that's what the character she wanted. So that's what I gave it to her. So Catherine Clayton's a fascinating character. I had a lot of fun with her.
This is book 18, and
Uh-huh.
um, as always, it's exciting and it's thrilling. Let's talk a little bit about something very important. As I said, this is just the beginning of Joy on Paper Live, and it is going to give so many of your readers the opportunity to see you, and also so many writers who are interested in the whole process that you've gone through since you started this series. When you have a big series like this, there's a lot of planning, a lot of organization that has to go into this. When you started it off, of course, you had, I don't think, well, maybe you dreamt that it would last through 18 books and many more. But how do you keep track of everything? What's your process? Now, of course, you have editors, and that also, I love that you dedicated this to an editor, because editors have to keep track of so much. And most people, when they're just starting off and they're writing their first novel, they're not sure what's going to happen, but they're not prepared for the massive amount of work that's involved in this.
No, I mean, editor is your friend. I mean, that's the guy or lady. You know, right now I have a female editor. I've had two female editors and one male editor, and they're your best friends, really. I mean, they're your guys. They're the ones that help you put the book together. They're your advocate within the house to advocate for your position and for your things and to keep the book moving along in production. I mean, editors are very, very important. And I rely on my editor. I like to hear what they have to say. I want to hear. I want to hear it. I'm very open to criticism. I'm very open to changing things. I'm not one of those writers that you do it my way or you don't do it at all. I'm open to listening to whatever you have to say. And in this case, you know, with a book, a series of 18 books, you do have to kind of keep it straight. And I kind of keep it straight with some notes and in my head. And a lot transpires, but I'm careful when I'm writing the books because I don't want to write them where you have to read them in order. I want you to be able to skip around. So in my books, you don't have to read this in sequence. They are a series, but they're also episodic in that they're both self-contained. So, you know, you want to try to make every book in a series the same but different, and that's a tall order and tricky. And I work very hard to adhere to that. Over the next 3 or 4 books, though, there's going to be some changes in Cotton's world. I'm definitely going to consciously make some changes. Things are going to happen between now and 2028 in his world. A lot's going to change up for him because life is that way. It needs to change up, and it's time for Cotton's to change up a little bit.
Authors are looking for an idea. They're saying, I need to know how somebody who's successful, like Steve Barry, how did he get to that point?
Well, it was a long process for me. And by the way, you caught me writing today. This is my writing shirt, and so I'm very casual today because I'm trying to finish up a novel. I'm at the very end of a novel. I should be done with it today or tomorrow, and that's always an exciting time to get it done. How did I get started? Well, for me, it was a long road. From the day I wrote my first word to the day I sold my first word was 12 years. During that time, I wrote 8 manuscripts. 5 of those went to New York publishing houses. They were rejected 85 times. I made it the 86th time, 12 years after I started. So it was a long road for me to get published. My first book came in 2003, and now we're in book 21 now. We're in a total of 21 novels, which is and I'm sorry, that's not correct. 26 novels, 26 novels, 18 Cottons, 2 Lukes, which is 20, and 5 Stanhope, so 25 novels. We're working on the 26th novel now, which will be the third Luke Daniels, and then the 19th Cotton Malone, which will come out next year. So soon there'll be 27 novels. So it's been a long road for me to get there, but it's worked out in the end, and here I am.
Your books are atmospheric because you do take us to all these places, which I love. And exactly what you said, you don't have to read these in order. You can actually read them in the order of what country you're interested in because you take us
Correct.
to all of these places. And I love that, a grand tour of the world. We can go around whatever country will be in the news, and you will want to know a little bit more about that country. I'm sure Cotton Malone's been to most of them. I started this program in 2015, but I'd already read so many of your books. You are so observant. And can you explain to people who are just starting off how, as a writer, you have to observe things? They say Charles Dickens could walk down a street and at the end he could turn around and tell you everybody he saw along the way because he noticed things. What's your process for noticing things, particularly when you do a book about a particular location? Do you get up like early in the morning and walk that area so that you see things? What's your observation challenge for readers and for listeners?
Well, I do exactly that. When I go into a place, a new place, I'm about to go overseas in about 3 weeks to do some research, and we're going to Romania to do some research in about 3 weeks. And I get up early. I go out maybe about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and I go where I need to go. I've done research on those places, so I've kind of made a list of what I'd like to go take a look at. That doesn't always hold true though when I get on the ground because I learn about stuff that I didn't know about. So I'm very flexible to move around. I keep my mouth shut and my ears open. I listen a lot. I pay attention a lot. I notice things. I look at everything. I'm very inquisitive. I sometimes hire a local guide who's very knowledgeable in the area and explain what I'm looking for, and they help out, take me to places that I would never get to go, speak to people I would never get to speak to, and I just ask questions. I'm very inquisitive and I make notes. I go back to the hotel in the evening and I type everything up. Everything that's fresh in my mind, it's all there. Today with an iPhone, I can dictate into it, and I do that a lot. I'll just hit the oral notes and I just dictate in and speak into it. And then that evening, I will type all those out into notes. I take a lot of pictures, a lot of pictures. I mean, probably over the 6 days in Romania, I'll probably take 500 to 1,000 pictures. I take a lot of photographs of things so that I have that written record later. So it's just a matter of being observant and paying attention and listening and asking questions and probing a little bit. Folks are really appreciative if you show interest in their stuff. They really like that. Most people are very appreciative and they are wanting to participate. And I've always been lucky in that regard.
Of course, with your background as a lawyer, one of the things a lawyer has to be aware of is really body language. You have to understand the people that are in that courtroom. You have to understand what a juror is thinking, or hopefully you can understand what they're thinking. How much does body language influence the way that you look at people when you are traveling to these countries?
Well, I pay attention to that. I was a trial lawyer. That's what I did. So I paid attention to jurors. I paid attention to witnesses. And so I do that when I'm going, but I'm not really cross-examining anyone when I'm on research. I'm more interested in getting, what I need to know, and hopefully it's accurate information. And as I said, most of the body language and most of the things I get are very, they're very appreciative and they want to participate. They want to tell you about it. They're thrilled that you want to know about it because the things I'm asking about are not in the books. These are obscure things. These are things that have been mentioned. An example would be, I was in Ely, a little village called Ely in Great Britain in about, I don't know, 12 years ago, 13 years ago. And we were taking a tour of the cathedral there just to kill a little time because we were doing a book tour and we were just killing some time. And the lady who was taking me through the cathedral was showing me everything and she was explaining everything. And I was listening to her and she was telling a story and she would say, and of course, with the Bisley Boy legend, this is how this and whatever. And I went, whoa, whoa, wait a minute. What'd you just say? Back up. Let's back up. What is that? And then we started talking about that and we learned more and more about that. And The King's Deception was born. The novel that became The King's Deception came out of that conversation. So you just never know. You just got to be observant enough to listen, hear it, grab onto it, and then learn everything you can.
One of the things I love, as I said, the traveling in the books, and where I've done a lot of research is in Bavaria, because I've been working on a book for years about Bavaria. I know that you love that area.
I do.
So so tell us, I always wanted to hear more about your opinion of Ludwig because of course I've been to the area. I've been interested in that period. I'm actually working more around 1848 in Bavaria. So
That's before Ludwig.
yeah, so I'm sort of leading into it, and so it's really interesting for me to hear your comments because you've done a lot of work on him. I know that you really enjoy this particular subject.
I do. I do. Ludwig II is very interesting to me. And I did the novel, the Last Kingdom. It came out a couple of years ago. Last Kingdom is my Malone book that's set in Bavaria, dealing with Ludwig's three fairy tale castles there: Neuschwanstein, Linderhof, and Hohenschwangau. I'm sorry, not, gosh, um, Herren Kimsey. Yeah, so it's Herren Kimsey, Linderhof, and Neuschwanstein. Ludwig is a fascinating guy. He's a very greatly misunderstood guy. Did he suffer from some mental illness? Probably, yes. Today, we probably would call him chronically depressed or bipolar. We could treat him with medication, but at that time, we couldn't. And he progressively got worse and worse and worse, and eventually he was deposed and then died mysteriously 2 days later. It makes for great fiction. I would love to do a historical novel one day, a pure historical fiction novel on Ludwig II's life, I think it would be interesting. He led such an incredible life, and he was so far ahead of his time in many ways, and and was a tragic figure in the end. So I love Bavaria. It's one of my favorite places in the world. I've had several novels have had scenes in Bavaria, but The Last Kingdom is set there completely.
Well, the Hohenzollerns are a fascinating family, and they a lot of stories revolve around them, and of course, a lot of the history of Europe and the changes that really started in 1848. So it will be a great novel.
Yeah, Ludwig came in 1864, 63, 64. He ruled to 1886. So that was before him, and it would be. There's a lot going on there. There's a lot of transition. The modern day Germany is being born there. What became Prussia and what led to World War I, its seeds were there. All of it was happening at that time. But then you have this great character of Ludwig and this personality that had so many, he was so eccentric and he had so many problems, so many issues. But then again, he was a forward thinker. He was way ahead of his time in many ways. Be a great novel. Maybe one day I'll get to write that book.
I'm sure you will. People don't understand sometimes that when you're writing what comes out, it has taken so many months and years sometimes to get to that point. I know that you've been working on some books. I think you've had some books in your head for a long time, or perhaps in your drawer that you're starting to pull out and bring to life.
I do. I have a science fiction novel I'd love to finish. I wrote about 15,000 words of it. I'd love to finish that book one day. I've got all the research, I've got everything there. I just need the time to sit down and finish it. So, something exciting happening, Greg, for me next year, next summer, is there's a book I wrote in 1992, and it was never submitted. It was one of those 8 manuscripts, but it wasn't one of the 5 that went to New York, and it just sat in a drawer. And then I rewrote it around 2001 or 2, and then during COVID I rewrote it again, and it got shorter and tighter and cleaner, and it's a really good story. And Grand Central bought it, so it's going to come out next summer. It's called The List, and for fans of Grisham, David Baldacci, or Harlan Coben, it's that kind of book for them. It's a suspense novel, and that's kind of exciting. So a little something different for me. I think my readers are going to like it, but I think those readers of Baldacci and Grisham and Coben are going to love it too. So it'll come out next summer. It's a very interesting story, a little bit biographical, tiny little bit, but it's a lot. I hope the readers are going to enjoy it.
Sometimes when you put something away and then the years go by, as you mature and you go back and you take a new look at it, all of the best parts just are there and you can see them right away, and you know now where to start pruning that tree to really make it blossom.
Yes, exactly. And that's what you learn your craft, and you can be able to get. So when I started off, the book was about 120,000 words. The book now is about 102. So you got rid of all the stuff you didn't need. It's cleaner, tighter, smoother. It's a good story.
It is very much like pruning a tree. I'm working on a book too, but I need to go back. I have 180,000 words, and I know it has to go. Part of it is though I love the character I'm writing about so much. I hate to take it out. We have to tighten this up and
You do.
start.
You do. You have to finish it. You got to finish it at some point.
I think it's wonderful what you've done with the Atlas Maneuver. It's a wonderful book. We're back with Cotton Malone, who I love. I love anybody who has a bookstore and loves old books. Cotton is my kind of guy.
Well, when I created him, I wanted him to be a little different. That's why I made him a bookshop owner. At that time, there wasn't any real thriller protagonist who had that kind of background. I like old books, and so Cotton likes old books, and so it worked out well.
Back then, the characters were always just hard drinking, run around kind of guys.
Hmm? Cotton's very different, and when you create a new thriller hero, you got to make him a little different. You got to make he or she different. You definitely do.
What's the oldest book that you have?
The oldest book I have,
Yeah. What have you purchased that was really special that's old, or discovered that was old?
the oldest book I have is probably 18th century. Yeah. I think I have a book from late 18th century around here, but I definitely have a lot of 19th century, early 19th to mid 19th century stuff. But I think I have one 18th century here that I got many years ago. Yes,
Now, you live in what state do you live in?
Florida.
Florida. Okay, so you're in Florida. And if you know that a hurricane is coming, as I do, and I live through many of these big hurricanes, um, is there one book that you would grab from your house if you knew the hurricane was going to come? Is there one book you'd grab and just
Wow,
you
that's a
you
good
would save?
question. Wow, what one book would I grab? No, I probably wouldn't grab just. I wouldn't grab one. I like them all. I could if I couldn't take them all. I don't know if I'd take. There's not one in particular of the books I have that I would get. I guess if I had to pick, I might take one of Michener's books because he was my favorite, and maybe one of Michener's books to make sure that it didn't get destroyed.
Is it autographed?
It is not. I only have one of his books that is autographed. I did not get to meet him before he died, so I do not have autographed books, but I have a complete Michener collection, except for the very first book. I don't have an original first edition of Tales of the South Pacific, but I have one pretty close to the first edition, as close as I could get. But I've collected all of Michener's books, so I have a whole row of all of his books that took me 40, 45 years to collect them all.
So you are also a book lover. How many books do you think you have?
I don't have as many as I used to. I got rid of a lot of them. I probably have maybe 1,000, 1,500 books here now. No more than that.
And of the autograph books, do you have anybody whose autograph book you particularly love?
Well, I have Michener. I have Ludlum. Ludlum was there. I have Cussler. Now, Cussler autographed those for me, so I watched him autograph those.
Oh,
I'm
I love
assuming,
him. He
yeah,
was a guest on Joy on Paper. He was so much fun. I
yeah.
so loved talking to him. What a fascinating guy.
He was, and I got to know him, and I have a complete Cussler, and I only have the ones he wrote himself. I don't have when he started with Dirk and the co-writers. I don't have those, but I have all the ones that Clive wrote himself, and he signed them for me. Um, those are very special to me. My Ludlum's is special, and I'm assuming that signature is authentic. I don't know for sure, and Michener's is the same way. I'm assuming that as well. But I have a lot of first edition signed. I have Lee Child's first book that he signed for me. I have Ken Follett's first book he signed for me. I have a lot of first books of writers that they signed for me that I hold on to.
And of course, Killing Floor, that's a great book. When you look back, and did you remember where you read The Killing Floor the first time?
Uh, Yeah, I mean that was back in the mid '90s. I was practicing law in Camden County, and I read it at night before I went to bed. I remember buying it. I bought it in the store, and I have a first edition that I bought, and um, said this is pretty cool. This guy's pretty neat, you know. And I got to meet Lee years later and became a friend of mine, so he signed it for me. And I have a David Baldacci's first book too. Absolute, I have that book signed as well. And I remember reading that one in the '90s as well. And I have Jim Rollins' first book, Jim's first book, and he signed that for me too, Subterranean. I loved it. I like the first books of people. I kind of go with the first book.
Well, of course, we can all go, and I don't have a first edition of Amber Room. I wish I did, but it is still, Amber Room, for people who don't know. Let's explain that book, because it made such an impact. I think. Well, of course, it changed your life, and
Mm-hmm.
it is still one of the best books. You can read it today. I'm sure it's selling because it is a great book.
Well, thank you. A lot of people say that's their favorite book of mine. It's not a Cotton Malone book. It was before Cotton, so it's a standalone. And it deals with the Amber Room, finding the Amber Room that the Nazis stole in World War II, and it disappeared in 1945, and no one's ever seen it since. And A lot, like I said, it's a fun novel. It was the fourth manuscript I ever wrote in my life, so it was one of the five that was submitted to New York houses, rejected in 1995 by the 17 houses at the time. And then in 2002, Random House bought it when we resubmitted it on a second time. It's interesting. It's the only book of mine that has bad words and sex in it too, because I don't use bad words anymore, and I don't use sex in the books anymore. But then that book I did, but it's the only one that has those in it. So it's a little different for me in that regard. The characters are wonderful. It'd make a terrific movie. It really would make a terrific movie. And a lot of people love it. It's still in print today in mass market. You can buy it in mass market in the store, and you can buy it in ebooks. It's still around today.
It's a great book, and you're right. It would make a great movie.
St. Petersburg's a beautiful town. Of course, traveling to Russia right now, I think, is problematic. It's a shame because we can't see these things, but maybe one day it'll loosen back up again.
And of course, the Amber Room in St. Petersburg is a replica. I think it's very realistic, right?
Yeah, they had 32 black and white pictures of the Amber Room, and they blew them up giant, and they made the pieces to fit exactly like the pictures. So it's as close to the original as you could possibly get. They finished it in 2003, right before my book was published. And a couple of months before my book was published, they finished the replica of the Amber Room. It's the greatest thing that man has ever done with amber is the Amber Room. It's spectacular. I went and saw it. I saw it in 95 when it was under construction. I saw it again in 2009 when it was completed.
I think people maybe haven't ever had amber, touched amber. It is a special substance, isn't it?
It is. It is tree sap, is what it is. It's prehistoric tree sap that from the pine forest that covered the Baltic Sea, and the sap solidified, and sometimes it would trap bugs and other stuff, leaves and things inside the sap, and that sap is sitting crystallized blobs of amber. Some of it is kind of crystal and kind of not very good, but what they look for to build the amber room is what's called jewel grade, which is the kind of amber you can see through, that's clear, doesn't have any cloudiness in it whatsoever. And it comes off the seafloor in the Baltic Sea, and it washes up on the sea. And that's where they find it, on the beaches there.
For fans of Jurassic Park who see them taking bits out of amber, that's not really going to work, I don't think. But
Well, they're looking for DNA from the blood sucking insects, and it's just clever idea. I mean, Michael Crichton had a clever idea when he came up with that.
it certainly worked. And you're right. I do hope. Well, I think it's it's been a long time, but maybe finally somebody will pick it up and make the Amber Room into a novel. What about Cotton Malone? Have you ever envisioned the actor who would play Cotton Malone?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of actors that could play him, really, because I don't really pin down his description. I just say he's tall, broad shouldered, green eyes with burnished blonde hair. And that's about all I've ever said about Cotton. I've never really gone into other physical detail. One actor that comes to mind is Chris Pine. Chris Pine could play him. He plays Captain Kirk in the Star Trek series of movies. He could be him. The actor Michael Weatherly, who was on Bull and NCIS, he could be Cotton Malone. That's how I envision Cotton. He's not a Daniel Craig kind of guy. He's not all buffed out and everything. He's an ordinary kind of guy. He's a George Clooney kind of guy, I always said, but Clooney's a little too old, I think, now to play
Oh,
Cotton. He's a little too old to play him, but that's how I envisioned Cotton. And who knows? It might come one day. You never know.
and Cotton's voice. How does he talk?
He has a little bit of a southern accent, but
Somebody
nothing
like you, I think, huh?
just a little bit, just a
I think
tad,
so.
but not
Sort of.
pronounced.
No, sort of like Lee Child, and his description as you go back and you look at how he described Reacher. And then, of course, when the first Reacher films came out, Reacher didn't look like Reacher to our minds. But the new Reacher,
Mhm.
he looks like Reacher.
Yeah, everyone has their own interpretation, and Tom Cruise had his interpretation of Jack Reacher. And frankly, I enjoyed the movies; they
Oh,
were
I
great.
love them. I love
And
them.
and, and Tom Cruise's interpretation is great. It's fine. It wasn't Lee's. but it was his, and that's fine. I respect that. He bought the rights. He has the right to make the movie however he wants to make the movie. But
And he
now,
did a
yeah, the
great
new
job. He did a great
he
job.
did. He did a good job. The new guy is very much more Lee's Jack Reacher, and he does a great job too.
Sort of a exactly. I do hope that when they make it, they use your voice as a
Mm-hmm.
example of what cotton should sound like, because I love your voice. It's
Thank
so
you.
delightful. It's well, it's got that southern charm, and I really love it. Thank you so much for being on Joy on Paper Live. It's been really exciting for me to start this program because I want to get out there and make sure that people find more books to read. And that's so important. We need more readers. And
Mm-hmm.
one of my what I want to get through to people is they can have that moment of excitement when you are in a book and you forget everything else around you. You're just that book is everything, and it takes over your life, and you start seeing things as I do when I get into one of your books. I'm in your world and I love it.
That's the goal. If I can get you to forget your world and your troubles for a little while and come into my world and enjoy it, I've done my job. That's my job.
And at the same time, people learn so much from your books because you do this just history is just flowing through your blood, I think, and it
Mm-hmm.
flows into your words. So often nowadays, I've discovered this with some of the books that I'm getting. Their history is history that they get from the net. They look it up and they have this bit of history, a little bit of history, but it's not something that flows through their veins like I know I do. I have 1,000 history books. History is part of my being. I love history. Of course, as we see in Europe today, people don't learn from history, but we can certainly enjoy it while we're reading about it through you.
That's the whole idea. I want to entertain you, but I'd like to inform a little bit too. And that's why I put the writer's note in the back of every book so that you can know what's true and false and delineates all of that. So you leave the book having a good understanding of everything. I think that's my job to make sure that I set everything straight before you leave the book.
You have been involved in promoting history, and everybody watching this, Steve Barry's The Atlas Maneuver will just intrigue you. It's engaging, and you're traveling with Cotton, and you're enjoying all of the characters that, of course, you've developed over the years and the new characters. And I think it's just really cool to auction off the name. I think it's a wonderful way to raise money for your favorite charity. I don't know where this one went. Um,
I think it went to a children's hospital.
I'm happy about that. I'm glad you mentioned that because since the pandemic, it has been really difficult for children's hospitals because before that, they used to have these little bookmobiles like a bunny mobile they could take from room to room and share the books with children. They don't do that anymore. Pandemic ended that. So now a child in the hospital, if somebody doesn't actually physically give them a book, they don't get these books unless somebody's donated books to the hospital that are new and clean. They don't take used books. So if people have an extra few dollars, all you have to do is go online and order it directly and have it sent directly to the hospital of your choice because children need books in hospital. I can't imagine sitting all day long as a child not reading a book because I spent my whole childhood reading a book.
So I was the same way. I did a lot of reading because when we were younger, we didn't have a lot of television and the internet. We certainly didn't have the internet. So books were our form of entertainment.
Yeah, I didn't. We didn't have television. I come from northern Michigan, and we didn't get television until much later. We everything came later in northern Michigan. So that was my childhood, sitting under a tree reading a book. It's been wonderful talking to you. I really appreciate it. The Atlas Maneuver is available online. It's book 18 in Steve Barry's wonderful Cotton Malone series, and you will find so many books in that series that you will love and travel around with Cotton and with Steve Barry. Thank you, Steve, for joining me
Thank,
today.
thank you for having me.
Wow, that was that was fun. Now, how many of you guessed 85? 85 rejections from 17 different publishing houses. Yikes. I wonder what those people who rejected him feel like today when he's now just about, I think, just about 30 million. And his books are in 52 countries, and every 8 seconds or so, and somebody's buying his book. Wow. But that 86th one that was the one that counted. And wow, he was on his way. Now, I just wanted to take a little break here and mention Eugenia Lovett West. She celebrated her 100th birthday on Joy on Paper, the radio program. And I was so thrilled to talk to her. She is just fantastic. We talked about everything about we talked all the way back to World War II, and her husband was a pilot. And of course, we talked about D Day. She remembered everything, talked about everything. But even more impressive is that at the age of 98, she decided to write a book about cybercrime. And and she started the research, she did the research, and she's written an absolutely fantastic mystery called Firewall, and it's great. And I mean, 100 years old. So when Steve Barry says he hopes he's going to have time to write that Ludwig II book, he's going to have time because he's going to continue writing. Just like Mary Higgins Clark, who was on my program, and she was writing, right, again, way into her 90s. So everybody, you just have to learn from these wonderful, wonderful authors that I interviewed. I've interviewed over 2,000 authors now in this, wow, 9 years, including 12 Mystery Writer of America Grand Masters, well, hundreds and hundreds of New York Times best-selling authors, Pulitzer Prize winning authors, celebrities, sports heroes, and even the U.S. Poet Laureate. I've spoken to so many people, and I need to get these interviews up. I have so many to put up, and so many that I want to just upload to my Patreon page so that I can share them with you. But I also want to bring in more authors to do longer interviews here on Joy on Paper Live, because authors they really, really need they need somebody to support them, and that's exactly what I'm doing. One of the things that I love to do is just talk to authors, and so here's the next Steve, and we're going to talk to another Steve, and this is Steve Anderson, and his story is are very interesting, and it's also interesting that both Steves have done a lot of work in Bavaria, in Austria, and Vienna. So you're going to find out from Steve Anderson about his wonderful series. Here we go. Hi, welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. And I am so happy to welcome to Joy on Paper Live Steve Anderson, who is an author of a wonderful series that I've been enjoying for a long time. And I am so happy to welcome you to Joy on Paper, Steve.
Thanks, Patsy, for having me.
This is going to be fun because, as I said to you, we talked on the radio, and so this is one of the first shows on the new live program. It's very exciting that I started this so that I could help authors just reach potential readers, because it's so important that you get out there. Before, when I talked to you, I had read your first book, and that was before my radio show, I think, and I didn't interview you then, but we'll talk about book 4 in the Kaspar Brothers series, Lines of Deception. Tell us about it and why it's so relevant for today. People are interested in what's happening in Central Europe, and a lot is happening. Explain how the past reflects the present.
Yeah, well, first of all, congratulations on your anniversary and the new show. And yeah, Lines of Deception. It's number 4 in the series, as you say, and it's involves both of the Kaspar brothers. They are Max Kaspar and Harry Kaspar, and they go through a lot of things in this series that we can talk about in a bit. But for this book, It starts with Max Kaspar in 1949, West Germany, which sounds sort of strange to say today, but it was West Germany for a long time. Max has been rehabilitated through the help of his brother because Max and Harry their family immigrated to the United States in the late 20s and early 30s, and Harry, the younger brother, he's more the American one, and he stayed there. Max, however, did a really stupid thing. He went back to Germany in 1939, not knowing that Hitler was going to invade Poland and World War II was going to break out. So Max, being the older brother and being more German than Harry, German is his native language, has to go through a lot in the war, and a lot of it goes against his nature because Max at heart, he's an entertainer. He's always wanted to be an actor. He loves life. He loves a good meal. He just wants everyone to get along. But the world has forced him to be another person. And by 1949, he's kind of back to who he wants to be. He has a small club in Munich called the Cuckoo. At the beginning of the book, he gets the very disturbing and horrible news that his brother Harry may have been kidnapped or is gone missing somewhere beyond the Iron Curtain. Over the course of this story, Max leaves everything behind, risks everything to go points east, Vienna, Prague, communist Poland, and other places to track down Harry and find out what exactly Harry is up to. Harry, meanwhile, at this point after the war, I can't give too much away, but he has gone from working for the U.S. occupation force in Germany to doing things for the early CIA. That's where we're at with this story. I can tell you a little more, but I think I've probably said a lot so far.
I think it's enough to intrigue people. And as I was saying, it is in an area of the world that is in the news. I didn't expect it to be in the news so much. We thought all of this was over. Of course, you traveled to these places, as I did when I was young. I remember East Berlin. I did spend a lot of time in Vienna. When people ask, well, what should I do when I'm writing a book? How can I make it really come alive and pop? So much is color. Knowing just the right few words sometimes to paint that picture for readers.
Thank you. I've worked very hard on it for many, many years, and all the good writing is in the rewriting, especially for historical books like this. It really is about the details, not just what someone's wearing, but it's a smell, it's a color, things like that. But going back to your journey into Eastern Europe, we could talk a lot about that. I'm intrigued. Halfway through writing the first draft of this book, I realized I'm sort of retracing some of the steps I took a long time ago. In 1990, the Berlin Wall just come down, and I was fresh out of college as an undergrad, and I wanted to see all this history before it went away. So I saved my money and went back to Europe and stayed as long as I could as a backpacker and made it into East Berlin, which was very interesting because this was spring of 1990. It was looking like Germany was going to be reunited, but the East German state still existed, and so they looked intimidating. They looked scary, but they were actually really nice. And I don't know if you did this, but we had one of those one-day passes where you had to spend a bunch of Deutschmarks, and it was hard to spend it all. So we spent the day drinking coffee and drinking beer and buying books. And I think I probably bought cigarettes back then. That was a long time ago. But then my trek continued into Prague, which was very interesting, and Poland, and I had an opportunity to see Auschwitz, which was as disturbing as you can imagine. And also I went to Budapest and the coast of what was then Yugoslavia. And even then, talk about, these sort of events. Yugoslavia was starting to show signs of breaking up at the time, and there was a lot of hate between different peoples. Interesting times. And to get back to what's happening now, it's really hard to imagine the idea of a land war in Europe. But it's going on, and it was certainly a threat in the period of set in this book when the Cold War was just heating up.
One of the reasons that I think people should read this book, it does give you insights into what it was like and what it could get like, because when you talk about East Berlin, they were very nice, but boy, they were really actually very dangerous. I I
Yes.
over the years when I lived in Europe, several times I was caught up in riots and overthrowing this, overthrowing that. Yeah, it was quite an experience, and I never expected this to happen again. I thought we learned from history, but apparently not. I loved my trips to Poland. Um, when you got there and you saw what had been done to Poland, on the one hand, the food and everything was so great, and on the other hand, the buildings were so bleak because of what the Russians had done. Cheap construction. We stayed with people who had one of the old houses built in 1890, and it was in better shape than the modern buildings. Exciting times, exciting now, but I don't think I'd go back there, except in your books, because you take us and we learn a lot. I love the way that you blend in all these historical incidents. I'm going to go actually to, this is the one, book one. I want to go back to book one. I want to talk about this one because, as I mentioned to you when we talked on the radio, my father was in the Battle of the Bulge. And I spent a great deal of time in Europe, and I walked through the Ardennes forest. So this is the beginning of the story. Now, let's talk about this book because I thought the losing role, I remember reading the first page, and recently when I went back and read it again, I thought, oh, this first page, it just grabbed me.
That's very kind of you to say. Thank you. That means a lot because I worked on that first page over and over. You want to pick the right moment and the right details, and including all those sights and sounds and smells. But it's hard because you also want to give a sense of character in a brief way. So I'm I'm pleased that drew you in.
And tell us about the story because there we have the introduction to the Kaspar, what eventually becomes the Kaspar brothers tale. But in this one, it's fascinating. I had already known about this story about what the Germans were doing, but explain what was going on here in the losing role.
Yeah, the story is based on a real life event that I was sort of obsessed with for a while, and it actually takes place in another book of mine and also in a short nonfiction history I wrote. The Germans at the end of the war, they were getting desperate, and as part of the Ardennes offensive, which launched the Battle of the Bulge, the Germans came up with this crazy, desperate plan to send over Germans who could speak English, dressed up like Americans, and wreak havoc behind the American lines. The rumor was that there was some of them trying to find General Eisenhower and assassinate him, and it's become sort of this legend that sounds really scary, like the Nazis really knew what they were doing and all that, but it was actually almost a farcical operation. Most of the English language speakers recruited or forced into it didn't really have good English. They weren't great soldiers. Some were, but most of these poor regular Joes, they ended up either getting killed or getting captured and killed or kind of crawling back through the Ardennes in the snow to their own lines. But a few also vanished, and I can't give too much of that away, but Max is one of these people, and the reason is because he spent a great part of the 1930s in New York City trying to become an actor, perfecting his English. He was trying not to get all the standard roles of Germans with scars on their faces and spiked helmets like from World War I. But he wasn't getting very far. And by the way, I loved writing about 1930s New York. It seems like such a magical period. But in this book, Max is forced over the American lines, and he ends up sort of in this kind of in-between world around Christmas in the snow, trapped with some other Americans in a house, and he has to make a decision about what he's going to do.
It's such an interesting concept. First, having the two brothers, one in the American military, and then one who is in a shadowy kind of life in Germany. In a way, it's also interesting how you describe them. You know, Max, his personality is so different from Harry's. The other book that I had shown the cover for, let me get to that one, Lost Kin. This is where things start coming really together for the two of them.
Yeah, I should point out the losing role, it takes place in Max's point of view, the older brother, and then Liberated, the second book, takes place in Harry's point of view, the younger brother, the Americanized brother. And in book 3, Lost Kin, it's now 1946, and Harry's got a kind of a cush post in the U.S. occupation force in Munich, and I won't give it away, but he ends up becoming reunited with Max, and they find out, as it is with brothers, they'll do anything for each other, but they're also very different. As I mentioned earlier, Max is sort of this bon vivant, and he loves life and likes to sing a song, and I imagine him wearing an ascot, that kind of thing, and whereas Max is kind of this, he's become Americanized, but he's kind of one of these can-do type people, and he thinks he's going to change the world, but he's also oddly sort of ironically Prussian and kind of stern, and this makes him seem kind of one of these almost noirish kind of hard-boiled characters. And so they kind of they go at it a little bit like brothers do, and I hope that comes through in the dialogue. Despite all that, they come together, and speaking of kind of in-between worlds that I like to explore, they resolve to rescue a group of Ukrainian Cossack refugees that are trapped between the Allies and the Soviet-controlled East. And Max and Harry resolve to rescue them because what was going on at the time was a very horrible thing. This is all real-life stuff. Joseph Stalin, as part of the Yalta Conference, had demanded that the Western Allies send back any Russians or anyone in Russian-controlled areas or Soviet areas that were in the West at the end of the war. So this included a wide range of people who did not want to go back for various reasons. And Roosevelt and Churchill were indebted to Uncle Joe Stalin. So we sent thousands upon thousands back, and it was very unfortunate. Many were killed on sight. Many were sent to gulags. Many disappeared. But Harry and Max are not going to let that happen in Lost Kin.
Let's go back for a moment to the losing role, because that is book 1, and explain how that came about, because you had an interesting journey with this one. This one you self-published?
That's correct. I spent a long time kind of writing and rewriting and looking for an agent and looking for a publisher, and I was lucky enough to land with my still current agent, Peter Riva, who I'm very thankful for. But in the meantime, I had these manuscripts that I wanted to get out there, so I put out The Losing Role in 2010, just kind of winging it like everyone did back then. The Kindle had just come out in 2007, and I got it in the best shape I could. I think I hired an editor, but while doing this and rewriting the very first novel I ever wrote, I realized that Max in The Losing Role and this other character in that other novel are actually brothers. They're both German American. They're doing things in the same period. So that very first manuscript I ever wrote, and I would hate to look at the first version, eventually through many rewrites became Liberated, the second book in the series involving Harry Kaspar.
When you started, you weren't already envisioning a long series, were you?
Hoping yes. But it's funny when you write and you get to know characters and you get to know situations. These things start to want to do things on their own. And it's almost like these brothers, just through the sheer force of will, kind of created their own series. I realized, oh, if I have the first book is in Max's story and the second book in Harry's story, of course they're going to have to get reunited after the war and continue on. So that's where we ended up.
When I talk about the joy of writing, that joy when characters start taking over your life and they lead you down the path. When you start a book, are you the kind who needs to know the first page and the last page? Do you already have that set in your mind? So many authors tell me they do.
Well, they might have, but it's not necessarily the way it ended up. I like to start with a character in a situation and explore that a little bit. And if it's working for me, then I create a real rough outline. It's not elaborate. It's just kind of a list. And then I'm kind of a cross between what they call a pantser, a seat of the pants writer, and an outliner. I just kind of follow along this route and see where it takes me. And often, as always, I end up venturing off that route because a character, you'll find out, as you know, will want to do a certain thing, and you have to see what happens when they go down that alley. John Le Carre has this famous quote about these sort of situations that ignite a book. He said, the cat sat on a mat is not a story, but the cat sat on the dog's mat that's a situation. That's a story, because both of these, the cat and the dog, both have completely valid reasons for going after what they need. And I'm always looking for those sort of situations.
With the brothers, you have to have this very distinct dialogue when they're talking. You've developed a kind of pattern for each of them, haven't you?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's a tough one. It also comes down to whether they're speaking English or German or not, which I sometimes have to specify. But often between them, it's English, of course. Max's English is a little more elaborate, a little more formal, with a little bit of fun in it. Whereas Harry, at least to me, is kind of a little more staccato American from that period. Sometimes some dry wisecracking, that kind of thing. And I like to inject that a little bit when they go at each other.
And you mentioned, of course, you're a German translator. Your German is perfect. So you could have gone behind enemy lines, maybe.
Oh, I don't know about that.
I don't know about that. But I know that you do translate a lot of German books into English, right?
I do. Yeah. In fact, that's one thing I'm obsessed with this language thing is those moments where Max has to speak English to some very angry and forceful Americans with guns behind the lines. Any tiny slip can give you away. Some of my experience living in Germany and learning the language informs that, what's going to give you away. And translation really is a world that comes into play all the time. And translating German books over the years is something I wouldn't say I got lucky, but I fell into it, and I found people who were interested in having me as a translator at the right moment. And it's an amazing work if you can get it. It's hard to get, but you learn so much about language, and also you get to see how other writers build their stories and how they create a paragraph and a line and why are they using that detail. Sometimes to make sense to an English language reader, I'll have to change a detail or a phrase for it to have that same emotional feel. And you get to know the writer's works sometimes more than they do. I'll email them back with questions and I'll sometimes catch them off guard because they don't have an answer.
Well, do you do vice versa? Do you translate your books into German?
No, that's a good question. I would never attempt to do that because usually at the level of fiction, you want to have a translator who is translating into their native language, just for that feel of language and that kind of thing. There are rare unicorns out there who can do both, who are truly bilingual, and I have great respect for them. But I, like most translators only translate into my native language.
Okay. Well, traders, I don't know. Was that a slip of the tongue?
Did I say? Did I say traitors?
Well, I don't know. I had just asked if your German is good enough that you could have been sent behind
Oh,
enemy lines and passed for a German.
that's a really good question. If I
I,
mumbled a lot, maybe. And
when you're speaking German in Germany, do people sometimes think that you are German? That
yeah,
feeling?
that has happened. They sometimes, I can tell they're looking at me as if they're trying to figure out where I'm from. Um, I actually learned all my German in southern Germany, mostly in southwest Germany and in Munich, and I think that comes through a little bit. I've had Germans wonder if I'm Dutch or something like that as well. So I don't know if that qualifies as native fluent, but I keep them wondering
Well,
sometimes. I'm sure there are also other Germans who can tell that, I'm an American right away. So it just depends.
what spurred your interest in studying German in the first place? Because you became a Fulbright fellow and you went to Germany to study German. Was there a reason that you wanted to study German?
That's a great question. I had the good fortune to have much older parents than other people have. I was the youngest of four. My mom was American, but her grandfather was German, and so I was exposed to German a little bit as a kid. She went as a young child. She went to German American school, which we used to have in the U.S. Before World War II, World War One. I was exposed to it a little bit. I wasn't really that interested. Later in my teens, I was very interested in soccer. I had this basic knowledge. I got to University of Oregon for my undergrad studies, and I was trying to get into a French class to study history. The class was full. All I could get was a German class. And I thought, okay, let's give it a go. That turned into an exchange language program in Tübingen, Germany, which is a beautiful little university town. Then I went back for the backpacking tour for about six months, but later in the 90s, I was a Fulbright graduate research fellow in Munich. It was a wonderful experience. I did not expect to get it, and I researched my master's, and I was able to use my German a lot there. In fact, you might have encountered this. I had a little trouble with the Bavarian German when I first got there. It's
Oh,
kind of
it's
different.
different. Oh,
Yeah.
it's different. I loved skiing. I always skied in Bavaria. So many people like Switzerland or Italy, and I had tried those places out, but Bavaria, I loved it because of the little villages. You could really walk to the slopes. You could get there so easily. I went 4 times every winter to Bavaria, to
Oh,
one of those little villages where you are welcomed and they get to know you and they are so kind. So I spent time there, and it definitely has a different sound. And of course, if you speak to somebody from Vienna, well,
oh, yeah.
they they're it's not really like German. It's like it's magnificent, really, when you hear them speaking.
Yeah, it's impressive. It's got its own sort of lyrical thing to it. I probably would never be able to master that, but yeah, I love hearing it.
I do too. To hear a Viennese person speaking, I think it's not just language, it's also they have an attitude. They think it's very classical and very classy.
Indeed, I remember earlier on when I was still learning German, I was with a group, and the German teacher who was taking us around took us from Southwest Germany into Bavaria, and he was originally from Hanover or Hamburg or somewhere, and we got off the bus in a small town, and I was talking to people and I had no idea what they were saying. And I looked at him and I said, "What are they say? What are they saying?" And he says, "I have no idea." He has no clue.
Well, speaking of Vienna, of course, you went to Vienna. Um, what's your fondest memory of Vienna?
Oh boy, there's so much.
Coffee
I
mit
just like
Schlag. For me, it's
coffee.
coffee mit Schlag. Just
Yeah, absolutely. Oh boy, yeah, that sounds great. The food. I'm a I'm a sucker for goulash.
oh, goulash. I love goulash. There is uh, to be in Vienna in the winter, and to be not having a lot of money. Um, you could go into these lovely little restaurants where the people, they made this goulash, and they were so kind. I mean, I was really poor at that point, really uh, very little money, and I could just sit for hours over one bowl of goulash, and they'd keep giving me fresh bread. So, and then at the
Yeah.
end, coffee mit Schlag.
Yeah. And I was also poor there when the first time I went, and just exploring all the nooks and crannies. And I'm a big sucker for period movies like The Third Man. So go into the Prodder and finding little alleys that could have been set during that period is always fascinating. And in fact, Max explores some of those streets in this book. But I also wanted to add the Christmas markets are really fantastic as well.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the great things now, I, as I said, I was poor, but I was smart, and so I had a rule because in those days, it was not easy uh, to get telephone calls and to get it was not easy, and I I once, like every few weeks, I would stay at the Hilton Hotel one night at the Hilton where I could have a really proper bath. You never got to the Hilton Hotel in Vienna?
Unfortunately, not, but that's a great strategy when you're poor or
Oh
backpacking
yeah,
is to every once in a while have a nice night somewhere.
that's what you have to do. If anybody goes to Vienna, they have this magnificent winding staircase, and if you want to make an impression, you come walking down that staircase in high heels. Well, not you, of course. You would look good just the way you are, but it was
Thank you.
it was it was a lots of fun. So there's a lot of reasons I found fun in reading your books and all this entire series, the Kaspar series. I think you've done such a wonderful job with it and making it um, something that you can pick it up. You don't have to start at the beginning. Read this one, go back because it's intriguing. You want to know more. I remember when I read the first one, as I said, because of the Battle of the Bulge. That was for my dad,
Mm.
and I have I have over 200 books about that period. It's just a great series, and I think people will enjoy it. I'm hoping for something like this. Every once in a while, I get books that I think should be streaming videos, and this is one of the series that I think they could have so much fun making this. I love period pieces, and I love that era. The clothes, the way people dress, the music of of that post-war period. Isn't it fantastic?
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm obsessed with it. I like watching old movies and doing the research as well. It's always fascinating, and that's kind of you to say about the streaming. Hope that works out someday. Because I used to write screenplays, and this, I try to write somewhat visually with some atmosphere, and hopefully that could carry over.
Yeah, because I did the same thing because I wrote screenplays. If I start reading a book and I see it as a movie in my head, and by the time I'm, halfway through, I'm forgetting that it is a book. It's like they're in my head. I can see them. And you have a lot of other characters besides the two brothers. So, as a matter of fact, let's talk about some of the other characters in this new book, um, and tell us a little bit about the other characters because they're full. They're fascinating and they do jump off the page too.
Oh, most important for me is Katarina Buchholz, who first appears in the second book, Liberated. Katarina was a star of stage and screen in Nazi Germany. She had made it, unlike Max, and she's not anymore because of the war and other things. But now in this book, number 4, Katarina is disturbed about what the Germans wrought during the war, and so she's, in her own way, she's trying to make up for that. And What she's found out, as Max has found out, is that these acting skills and things, they actually can carry over to espionage and doing things undercover. So she is now working for the Israelis, and she's part of one of these groups that were a real thing. Sometimes they were called the Jewish Avengers. There were other names for them, and they went out. I can't give too much away, but they went out after the war, and they were looking for Nazis to hunt them down because they weren't seeing enough justice served. And so she is one of these now, and she's living life on her own terms and kind of creating her own justice. And Katarina, I wish it could be the Kaspar brothers and Katarina series. I would love to have her own book because, like, the women in my novels, to me, it's a lot like real life because they often have a greater and more direct sense of what's right and what's smarter to do, whereas the men often kind of bumble along and figure it out in the end. So, and yeah, I could talk at length about Katarina, but I'll stop here.
Oh, some lucky actress is going to play her one day. I know it. I can see it. I can see it. And going back, I hope when they do it, I want them to get that atmosphere. There's a special atmosphere that you have in your books. And of course, the music of that period. And just, I think the fun of an actor doing something like this, I think it comes through in the book. And I hope that we'll see that. But meanwhile, people, all of you readers out there, get Lines of Deception. It's by Steve Anderson, and you will enjoy it. And I know, I can guarantee, once you read this book, you'll go back and read the other ones because they're just so interesting. You have done a wonderful work in bringing them to life. And I just wanted to ask, when it's funny, so much of the, I get so many questions from people who are just starting off writing. You mentioned that you have a wonderful agent, and that's Peter Riva, of course. And over the years, you've also worked with editors. How do you find that rewriting process? And do you I was working with some people who went through NaNoWriMo this past November, and now they've had time after the holidays, after Christmas, January. They started looking at what they wrote in November, 50,000 words, and they realized, oh, we're going to have to fix that. I only had one person. I had 9 listeners who did NaNoWriMo, and they finished, and they wrote 50,000 words. And I only had one who said, I'm ready to publish. I didn't laugh out loud, but I said in the email, I said, well, I really would consider finding an editor and perhaps working with the group. So what do you do? Is there one page or one sentence that you've written a dozen times?
Oh, every one of them, probably every word. Yeah, I learned at some point that first draft is just getting it out, and it doesn't need to be in any good shape or form. When you get that first draft done, that's when you're just getting started. We've all seen in the movies where it's usually a man and he's at a typewriter and he's probably drinking whiskey and he writes the whole manuscript and he's done and he shifts it off. That's not the way it is. It's all about the rewriting, and that's.
Oh, well, he's made a mistake. I can tell you. You can't do it if you've just been drinking whiskey. You need bourbon.
Right.
Now, when bourbon,
okay.
I'm sorry,
Right.
when you're typing and you're drinking bourbon, and I love bourbon on the rocks. I know it's sacrilegious or something, but bourbon on the rocks, you're okay. You finish, it's ready to go. You're sure that it's ready to go, right?
Yeah, yeah. I love bourbon too, by the way. Yeah, you're just getting started, and it's very scary to send your stuff out for other people's opinions, especially editors who know what they're doing. But it's amazing what they find and how they help you. I'm so indebted to editors for finding tighter ways to the story, more revealing ways to a story. It always makes it better, for sure. I should add, but it's probably a cliche, but you shouldn't just have your friends or family look at it. You should really send it out to someone who doesn't know you, because then they won't feel like they have to tell you what you want to hear.
Do you belong to writing groups? Have you done that?
That's a good question. I have in the past. I don't anymore. Early on, I did it. They're good, especially if there's some experienced writers in the group and if there's someone who's a good moderator. I found that you get good critiques of your work and it helps you to understand what others are doing as well. But in the end, you also, like with a rewrite, you still have to go back and figure out what your instincts are and go with your gut. And a lot of those instincts get developed when you rewrite and you rewrite, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. Do you like to read your work out loud? Do you do that?
Yeah, no one loves to hear themselves read their work, but at least I don't. But I do. I do it later on, closer to the finished phase when I'm polishing to make sure things are just right. And I'm sure that first page of The Losing Role I read many times. And with technology now, you can also have the computer read it back to you in a decent voice, and that's always a nice trick to do.
When you're writing away and you're just really into it, and every once in a while, do you just stop and say, "Whoa, this is a great sentence"? Do you keep a list of your great sentences?
Uh, I don't. That's actually a good idea. There's this funny thing happens where you know this, where when you're writing your draft or you're writing something that you know is going to be rewritten, it's one side of your brain and you're free and everything feels good and everything seems great. And then when you're rewriting and editing yourself, this other side of your brain kicks in and tells you, no, that's not great at all. It's in the wrong place or that kind of thing. I do there yeah, I think there are certain phrasings and things I return to, and I've learned that it's okay to use things, it's okay to derive things from other things. That's all part of your original voice as well.
When you've rewritten and it's ready to go, um, what's that feeling like? Does it a weight off your shoulder when you're ready to send it to the editor, or are you just like holding your breath?
This is a great question. It used to be terrifying, to be honest, to send it off, but now it's this anticlimactic experience where you don't really want to let go of it because you're still in the story. And I find a couple weeks later, I kind of miss being in that world, but I can't add to it because it's off to someone else. So I think that's a good sign that it's a story that you care about and you like to be in there. I think a lot of us do this because we get to live these other worlds vicariously that we've read about or are intrigued by.
Nowadays, an author has to be responsible for a lot of things. It's not just the writing, it's not just the rewriting, it's everything that comes after. And so often, people who are going into writing their first novel, and even the ones who get published by a publisher, they don't understand that there is a lot of work that goes on the other side. So, how are you tackling that with your World War II series? Here, I know you've done some other series, and we'll talk about those one day. But here you have um, basically a military Cold War series. How are you getting out there to readers?
That's a good question. We are told these days to do a lot of things, be all over social media and things like that. My advice is just to do what feels comfortable to you and what you have time, for example. Yeah, there's a lot that we're expected to do. It's always been tough, but when I started imagining the idea of being a writer, it was a long time ago and there wasn't social media and things like that. And writer just did the writing and sent it off and did some readings and things. But now you're, especially around a book release, you should be on social media a little bit, but only what feels comfortable for you. And I would say for sure stick to the things, if you're going to do nothing else, that you have control over. For example, just have a very simple website and put a newsletter on there. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to send out a lot on your newsletter, but that'll get you your own email list of readers over time that you retain, and it's yours alone, unlike followers on Twitter. Like what became of that? Those are followers that aren't yours. It really comes back to, you really have to love the writing and love doing the writing, because we're doing all the other things and able to hopefully do the writing more.
Well, have you done anything out of the box? For example, there are the these groups, as I mentioned, because my dad was in the Battle of the Bulge, and so many people have family who were involved in the Battle of the Bulge, and they're interested. They want to know because, as in my dad's case, he didn't talk about it. It was
Mm.
years before I could get anything out of him. All he would ever talk about is getting to meet Marlene Dietrich because she was there at that time as an entertainer. She was such a brave woman. She went right to the front. She wanted to be with the men. And my dad felt he was blessed that he was with his guys. They were walking along the side of the road. They were not going to the camp where she was going to be performing, but she drove by in a Jeep, and the, she drove by, then the Jeep stopped and the Jeep backed up, and she stood up, and there are these 8 guys, and of those 8 guys, later on he told me 3 of them died in the Battle of the Bulge. So
Oh.
those 3 guys, the last woman they ever saw in their lives was her, standing on the back of a Jeep, taking off her helmet and her beautiful hair flowing out. There are all these organizations for people who have relatives who were in the Battle of the Bulge. Have you attended any of their events? Do you approach them? Have you done any VA events? Because I think you would have a wide range of readers out there who would really love this series.
Early on, I used to have this hang up where my stuff set in this period was a lot of the characters weren't very heroic. I maybe felt like I wasn't doing justice to some of the sacrifices people had made, but I've gotten over that now, and that's a good point. Now that these books are re-released by my new publisher, I think that might be an option. My parents lived in an independent living facility close to Portland here where I live, and when my first books came out, I did a reading there early on, and the response was fantastic. I got to talk to a lot of people, and that should have taught me a lesson right there.
Exactly. There are wonderful events that you can attend, and people would appreciate it. I think you have an opportunity there to really reach people who are who already know something about the period.
Oh, that's a great idea. Actually, that's something I need to pursue because a lot of times, you're told to be on social media and things like that. And
Speaking, it doesn't get you anywhere. I'm sorry.
well,
I mean,
I tend to agree because you want to speak to the people who are interested in your work.
even today's military, at today's bases, we have a lot of veterans who are in the hospital, and they love to read military books. I have 200 books about World War I and World War II because I'm fascinated by the period. And there are so many people like me, and you can reach out to the younger generation of soldiers who are in the military. An author spends so much time alone, so much time in their own world, but you have to come out of it in order to get out there and do the marketing.
That's a great idea. You're actually inspiring me, and you're making me remember that some of the readers who have contacted me have been in the military and did have parents who went through some of the horrible conditions of the Battle of Bulge and other places. So yeah, thanks for inspiring me. I think I'm gonna take a
Well,
better look
and
at this.
if every year there are groups to Normandy, so you have an opportunity to meet these people. Um, and as a matter of fact, your book, I think the losing role should be in a gift shop. They have gift shops there. I don't know if you've been to Normandy, been to the beaches there, and if you've been to those areas where tourists gather every year, particularly around D-Day. It's heartbreaking, actually, but they're looking for books to read and have that connection. And I think they would appreciate the work that you've done in doing this series.
Thank you. I'm writing this down as soon as we're finished.
Okay. The whole point of Joy on Paper Live is to help authors find new readers, to reach out, and something like this, being on YouTube, it's out there, and now it's up to you to promote it and promote Joy on Paper Live, and get people watching, and they'll become interested in your books. You have an enormous potential, and as I said, I believe that it's going to be a streaming series one day, so we have to we have to get people out there reading and keep you writing because you'll need a few more books under your belt for this.
Thank you so much, Patsy. It helps to be Patsy approved as I move forward here.
Well, lots of things are happening in your life, and I know that I'm going to actually be having you back sooner than I had expected because I didn't realize. I mean, I knew that you were working on the Kaspar books and your other series, but we have something coming up.
Oh
Oh
yeah.
my goodness, what is this?
Yeah, that is something different for me. It's not normal for me to have two books come out in one year, but there's worse problems to have. Show Game is a psychological thriller. Takes place in the current day, and it's one of those stories that started with a situation, and I just took it from there. It's coming out this July, actually.
And so that means you're going to be back.
I hope so. I hope you'll have me. I'd love to talk about it.
Oh, I love psychological thrillers, so I'm looking forward to that one. The fun thing about doing a program like this, Joy on Paper Live or Joy on Paper, the radio program, is that people have to send me the books ahead of time so I have the fun of reading them. So all I need is the book and the release date, which is July. I'm not sure which day, but
I believe it's July 2nd.
okay, well, just in time. So absolutely, you send it to me, and you'll be back here. And meanwhile, we have your website up here, and it's Steven Anderson. And then you're also on Facebook as Steve Anderson, author, right?
I am, yep. And I also have a personal page there, and I'm on Instagram. And my website there also has a newsletter if anyone wants to sign up, because I don't just talk about when my books are out. It's called Underdog Stories, and I tell little known history and some of the stories behind my books, and there's a few writing tips and things. And as you'll notice, my website is spelled a little differently than the name on my book covers, just because there's so many Steve Andersons out in the world. So
well, Steve, it's been great talking to you, and I will have you back in July. We'll talk more about your books and about writing tips. Any top of your head writing tip for all those people who are dreaming? I always say at the beginning, this program is for writers and those who dream of writing. So, what do you want to say to people who are dreaming of writing?
that's a great question. I would say, among all the noise and the things you're told to do and this and that, just make sure you're writing and rewriting and have a great story, a strong book, because that's the foundation for the rest of it. Without that, you shouldn't really be doing the rest of it.
And then just enjoy yourself and have fun because
Oh, absolutely.
that's the whole point of all of this. That we want to encourage people, we want to engage people, and we want people to enjoy. And guests on my website, joyonpaperlive.com. And Steve, thank you so much, really, for joining me today. And we'll just say bye to you now and see you in July.
Thanks a lot. That was a joy, and I appreciate it. And congrats to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye bye now.
Bye bye.
Wow. Okay, well, there are a lot of Steves in this world, but luckily I had two of them on the program today. And my goal here at Joy on Paper Live is to encourage, engage, and make sure that you enjoy, because there are so many wonderful books out there, so many wonderful things that you can be reading, and just, it's just so much fun to get to know the authors and the stories behind them. And I wanted to show one more thing. Since I had two Steves, and since they're both, of course, love traveling in Europe and particularly in Bavaria, I thought, I would crown them today. So here are my two Steves, my favorite two Steves. And because Steves are victorious, it's a wonderful name. And they're Steve Berry and they're Steve Anderson, and they are fantastic. And they are winners, and they are victorious. And they deserve to be crowned because they have done what a lot of people dream about. They have become published authors. and they are selling their books, and they're having lots of fun doing it, and they're having lots of fun doing research. So you should think about writing your own book. And to help you write your book and to help you promote your book, you need to read the Frugal Book Promoter. It's called the Frugal Book Promoter, and it's written by Carolyn Howard Johnson, and she is going to be on my next program, episode 4, and we are going to be talking about all things Amazon, and she's going to help you with lots of ideas. And her website is How to Do It Frugally, and she will be here when I do the next program. And we're just going to have her back all the time because we need to learn more about how to promote books. And there I am. I am me, Patsy with a Z, and I hope to inspire you and to read more, say something nice to someone today, and aspire to be someone to remember, because that's important. And there I am between the trees, as I was all of my childhood. And everybody, again, thank you for all the good wishes about the 9th anniversary of Joy on Paper, the radio program. And there we are. We had a nice press release, and I want to thank everybody for that. And Joy on Paper Live, you can find out who is coming on my program next. It's joyonpaperlive.com, and you can go there. And meanwhile, remember to be somebody worth remembering. Do something good for somebody today. And here is some music to send you off and to remind you to share the joy and to give a child a book and to read a book to a child, because it is so important. And here we go.